So let me go through that list real quick.
Yeah,
this goes
we need
back to GoldenEye.
Bond movie.
This goes back to GoldenEye. The movie GoldenEye has everything, and not
I
only
would
does it have
argue
everything,
Casino's not missing it, but they're not. Each individual Bond movie trope
Nance.
isn't like flashing out.
Nance, the list of these things in GoldenEye has now become a list of anti-things in Casino. When I first read the list, it was, hey, GoldenEye has all these things. Now I'm going to read the list again. It's Casino doesn't have any of these things. Okay, here we go. We don't have Q and we don't have Moneypenny, even though I do kind of get the sense that the blonde woman at the Ocean Club or whatever, she kind of feels like the perfect Moneypenny if they would have had a Moneypenny in that movie. Like, she looks like a compliment to Daniel Craig specifically. She probably is too attractive, but she looks like she would be the perfect wife boo. You know, incredible prologue that is significantly significant to the overall pre and post Cold War story. Really cool prologue.
Does Bond have to be Cold War related?
Well, that's the question of GoldenEye. This story was initially part of the Cold War. It doesn't have to be, but that's because GoldenEye already settled that question. So it's almost like it relies on GoldenEye. Anyway, my point there being, though, that technically the prologue in this movie is wasted. It's fantastic. We finally get to see Bond become a 00, but it doesn't weigh in on the end of the story.
Maybe not the end, but it weighs in on his character throughout the story.
Yes, it does. I do not disagree with you. But in the past, we've defined a wasted prologue as one that doesn't weigh in on the rest of the movie. This one doesn't weigh in on the rest of the movie, other than he becomes a 00, which is awesome. Seeing him become a 00 for the first time is great. But the movie isn't about him becoming a 00 so much as it's like
becoming a 00 and then wrestling with what comes with being a 00.
Yeah.
And dealing with it.
Specifically versus the prologue of GoldenEye, which is setting up his whole story with Alec. Alec being an evil version of 007.
It's a great pre-title sequence.
Yeah.
I would say they're both great pre-title.
I agree with you, but think of it this way. If you got rid of the pre-title sequence on GoldenEye, the rest of the movie would suffer from a lot of confusion. Whereas if you got rid of casinos, you'd miss out on a really good character scene, but it wouldn't really affect the overall plot. I would kind of argue that there aren't necessarily personal stakes or world-ending stakes. You could maybe say that some of this is personal for Bond, but not really. Even with Vesper, it's not the same kind of personal stakes.
For GoldenEye, are there world-ending stakes? Because it almost seems like Alec Trevelyan's focus is just the money.
It doesn't matter. It's
global financial meltdown.
The United Kingdom will re-enter the Stone Age.
A worldwide financial meltdown.
It would devastate the world.
So he's not just like holding ransom. He's like messing up the whole system.
There's a personal, and I would argue that
Definitely
Casino Royale
stakes.
has a personal stakes in towards the end of the film with Vesper.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really change until we get to the third movie in this movie.
Yeah.
Because the second movie is not his personal stakes. He's there to do this mission. And there might be a little bit of, it's all driven by his ego where he's like, that motherfucker, I'm going to get him.
Here's where I disagree, where it's like, yes, it is personal between him and Vesper, but then it turns out that she betrayed him, so suddenly it reverts back to not being personal.
I care! Allow me.
That's what's personal about it, is that she betrayed him, though. That's what's personal about it.
But had Vesper not been the traitor, then I would agree with you that it's personal that the bad guys would kill her. But once she betrays him, she's just another bad guy, and suddenly the personal stuff is removed.
Well, I would say the same sort of thing with Alec. Like, he doesn't even know Alec is still alive, right? So it's not necessarily personal, minus they know each other from a previous life.
It goes from vague bad guy, impersonal, too personal the moment that it's this ally of his from the past who ends up being the bad guy.
I trusted you, Alec.
Trust.
So I'm saying there's like an inversion. It's like in GoldenEye, it's impersonal to personal, whereas in Casino, it's personal to impersonal by the end. Bond is straight up like, the bitch is dead.
If you do need time.
Why should I need more time?
Job's done. The bitch is dead.
He makes it impersonal versus that moment of, for England, James? No, for me, motherfucker.
Avenging Alec Trevelyan will not bring him back.
You didn't get him killed.
Neither did you. Don't make it personal.
Never. For me.
Maybe people watching will be like, dude, it's all the same. No, it's not. It's It's
I
it's
get where you're
different.
going.
It's different.
Move on. Let's
So,
go.
okay, moving
Next
on.
point.
What's the next point?
Sexually suggestive female henchman name, Miss Onatop, which briefly you get Stephanie Broadchest, which is hilarious.
And you're Miss Stephanie Broadchest, Era.
I am not.
You're gonna have to trust me on this.
That's a good
could
one.
they could have said small bone, right? They could have said small bone. No gadgets to speak of whatsoever. Not even Q. No baccarat. Of course, we had to replace it with poker because poker was big at the time.
You could argue, though, that poker's a definitely better game than Baccarat for person on person, reading the other person and playing their hand versus
Not necessarily.
yours.
Not necessarily reading somebody. Baccarat, you are reading the other person. But I would agree with you so far as if you're going to prove that you're a mathematical genius,
A bit of a mathematical genius and like to prove it by playing poker.
then different hands being better than others
I have 2 pair and you have a 17.4% chance of making you straight.
is superior to Baccarat, where you're just trying to get as close to 9 as possible. It's like blackjack
Yeah, it's
versus
like
poker.
21.
right?
Like, oh,
Yeah.
and more people can try to get to 21 than can do the math on the likelihood of all these different hands in poker and the likelihood that they have it versus opponents.
No bad guy layer, no assault on a bad guy layer, no commandos to have an assault on the bad guy layer, no goofy element of James Bond being caught hooking up at the end. Fitting bad guy deaths don't even weigh in because now we're just like, and that's almost another point towards like, this isn't necessarily a Bond movie. This is just like a modern spy movie where that's not even an element.
Maybe Bond or Mr. White could be really good at throwing playing cards and hits Lashik in the eyeball or something.
Yeah, there you go. I feel compelled to reiterate that I'm not saying Casino should have any of these things. In fact, it's a really good thing that it doesn't. What I am saying is that GoldenEye does have these things, and it makes it a very complete Bond film, as determined by how Bond films evolved over decades. For example, anybody out there saying, well, Q wasn't in the book, guess what? Q wasn't in any of the books. He came about entirely through the adaptation to the screen. But can you imagine the world of James Bond without Q?
If it hadn't been for Q Branch, you'd have been dead long ago.
My Bond list is you've got Bond, and he's great in both. You got a Bond girl. We get pretty good Bond girls in both. I'd argue Eva's better. Villain, they're great in both. Gadgets, I would say no gadgets is better than silly gadgets. Not that GoldenEye has silly gadgets.
Adds to a serious Bond movie. We've talked
Yes.
about that a million times. Again, that weighs in on Bond movie versus good movie. Good movie versus good Bond movie.
These are all Bond movie things. Like, and also like opening and action scenes, I would argue casinos are better. And for me, again, like the miniature work kind of brings GoldenEye down, which it should, in your guys' eyes, it wouldn't. So
in
I
my
get that,
view,
I
it
guess.
doesn't.
Songs throughout, title sequence songs, I would say Casino definitely wins there.
Pause for that. I don't give a what Scott says. I mean, I'm always going to have a Chris Cornell bias because Chris Cornell is the man. But You Know My Name is the perfect James Bond song so far as the lyrics are all about the man. It pumps you the up. I mean, that final of Daniel Craig walking up and introducing himself for the first time as the song is crescendoing. I am fucking jacked and ready to go. Full stop.
We don't get the theme, the Bond theme, until the very end, which is like he has become Bond, and then they play the Bond theme.
Yeah.
They really withhold that.
Which is appropriate.
Also, the music, like in GoldenEye, the car chase scene, immediately post-title sequence, the music there is like weird. The music choices in GoldenEye are strange. That car chase scene's not bad, or at least it's fun. But the Bond car, the Beamer, literally does nothing in the movie. At least we get a small chase with the Bond. Like, I love cars.
What is it with you and moving vehicles?
Getting a bit of
Do you?
a chasing. Yeah. In Casino, like.
What did you think of Bond's Ford in this?
Well, you definitely notice, along with Sony, Ford has a big involvement. I think at that point they own Range Rover, Aston Martin. That's why all these cars are in there. And you see Goldfinger driving the Range Rover at the resort.
You caught it. You
Range
caught
Rover
the
that Bond
Goldfinger
crashes.
reference.
Oh, for sure.
It could only be a Goldfinger reference that a somewhat heavy-set, golf cap-wearing Germanic dude with a gold Range Rover bugs Bond about whether or not he's going to valet his car, and then Bond goes and messes it up.
Range Rover, Rolls Royce.
What a subtle but brilliant Goldfinger reference.
We get the DB5, we get the DBS, we get a short chase scene. So they're a bit more involved than the so-called BMW Bond car in GoldenEye. But
yeah,
I mean, M even says in the M scene, no, not M, Q.
Behind the headlights, Stinger missiles.
Which comes into play in a later movie, but the car does nothing in, in GoldenEye.
Yeah.
They drive into Cuba for a second. But so, I mean, I would argue these are all the Bond things that I think a Bond movie needs to have, and Casino has them all. Minus gadgets, I guess. I don't know. You get a defibrillator, but...
What I would say about GoldenEye is that GoldenEye is the product of decades of Bond films. All these tropes that came about not from the books, but from the films. Because in the books, you don't have an assault on a bad guy layer every book. But you start to have that in the movies because the movies start to have these specific expectations that audiences are looking for. Because
this movie's boring. We need a layer invasion.
Most audiences haven't read the books. So the movies start to stack up these tropes. All of those stacked tropes, they crescendo with GoldenEye. GoldenEye is the epitome of the Bond film, the most well-balanced Bond film. Versus Casino Royale, the best adaptation of a Bond novel to date. Those are two different things. And that's where, again, I was expecting to almost fight McCurdy for the top spot because I thought McCurdy was going to love this movie based on Secret Service.